Well, good afternoon, my history scholars. It's me again with my weekly update. Hope you guys are doing well. You enjoyed the nice weather this weekend. I got a bit of a sunburn myself. I'm sure some of you anglers are happy that you're able to get out and fish for some trout and things like that. But here we are, kind of a dreary day out here. The weather doesn't look great this week, unfortunately. But I wanted to take some time to explain what's going to happen in our next unit. So we just finished World War II. Thank you guys very, very much for all your hard work with that unit. Your responses have been fantastic. Your response rate has been phenomenal. A lot of my teacher friends are very jealous with the fact of how many of my students are actually completing and responding to online learning. This week, we're going to talk about a topic that's a little bit heavier. It's probably one of the biggest black eyes on Canadian history, and it's on Indigenous people and Indigenous genocide. So this is the first series of a new section I started last year called Canadian History X. And we start off with Indigenous genocide, and I'm allowing for 2 weeks for this unit. So it's a bigger unit, it's a heavier unit. And I want you to take your time with it. But there's a few different sections. So the first section, we're going to talk just about Indigenous people and the first contact with Europeans. And this unit is a little different this week because at the checkpoints, I just want you to use that space to jot down one or two things that stood out to you in that section. I don't want you to worry about grammar. Point form notes are completely fine. And the reason I say that is because your final checkpoint will be a bit of a longer response, but I'll explain that in a minute. So just a couple of things that stood out to you from that section. The section 2 is the British explosion. So that's when the British immigration started to move over. And that's a quick one if you can just jot down a note or two. The third section is called assimilation and enfranchisement. And this is when, the Canadian government really started digging their heels in, with John A. and the boys, and just another checkpoint, a couple of notes that stand out to you. This is where things start to get a little heavier. This is Section 4, Cultural Genocide and the Indian Act. The Indian Act is actually a legit act. It's still called the Indian Act, even in 2020 today, which is very not a good term to use. This is where things get a little heavier, where we see the systematic removal of Indigenous rights and trying to assimilate them into the white man per se. So this is a bit of a longer section. There's a great video here. It's 25 minutes long, but it's called The Indian Act Explained. And it actually goes over some of the really terrible things that our government did to remove the rights of Indigenous people. So it's definitely worth the watch. It's not a flashy video by any means, but it's very informative and kind of jaw dropping, really. So moving on from there, just a couple of points from that section, and then we move into residential schools, which is probably one of the heaviest parts of this unit. Feel free to skip over it if you want, but I think it's extremely important for us all to be aware of residential school systems and how they shaped our country and how they created a lot of problems with Indigenous people that are still visible today. Moving on from there, after the residential schools were still going on in the 60s, but the 60s scoop is something I just learned about probably a few years ago. And this is where Indigenous children were literally scooped up from their houses, and they were essentially shipped to different parts of the world. So you can check that one out too. And then once again, another checkpoint. And then Truth and reconciliation. So this is something that has been happening probably in the last 10 years. The Trudeau government, it began with the Harper government back in the 90s. Prime ministers have been building on that. Justin Trudeau has allegedly wanted that to be part of his government's mandate, is to really focus on truth and reconciliation. And there's some videos in here, and even where the Catholic Church weighs in as well, because they did have a role to play. And then the final section, section 8, this is the Oka crisis. So basically what I have here is it's a 44-minute documentary. This is um, it's a great documentary. It was a focal point in our country's history. Uh, it's optional to watch it. I know it's a bit of a longer documentary, but it's definitely worth the watch. It's very informative and it's very well done by CBC Docs. Um, and then if you want to jot down a couple of notes there as well. The reason I just got you to jot down some notes is your final checkpoint. It says this was a larger week, so you're going to have 2 weeks to do this. So you're asked to jot down 1 or 2 items of interest as you travel through the sections, which I hope you guys are able to do. Then I'd like you to take a few minutes just to review all the notes that you wrote down. And I want you to construct a final reflection. Oh, I got a cat coming here. There he is. That's Sergeant. All right. Get your ass out of the feet. Yeah, there. So where was I? Oh yeah. I want you to construct a final reflection on your thoughts on what you learned about the history and treatment of Indigenous peoples in Canada and why it's important for us to focus on truth and reconciliation as we move forward. Your final responses could be 100, 200 word range. Some of you may be able to write 1,000 words. There's a lot of content here. And just put that in the next slide. And so there's another slide here for that response. And then just submit that when you're done. Another optional submission, you could videotape yourself, creating a video like I am, and just offer your thoughts on what you learned about, the Indigenous history in Canada, and you can do that instead of submitting a written response. So if you're going to do a video like that, almost like a self-interview, could be 5 minutes long, could be 10 minutes long. It's totally up to you. So that's it. We're going to go for 2 weeks here. So bringing up our calendar. This one won't be due until May the 17th. So we got 2 full weeks. So pick away at it. Some of the sections are a lot longer than other sections. This is one unit that I'm most proud of creating. I think it's extremely important. And I know a lot of you have been requesting that we cover Indigenous history and residential schools. So viewer discretion advised. There's some heavy content. I'm available for any emails. There is some rumblings in education right now that we may be able to do some video conferencing. So I'm looking into that. I think it'd be kind of cool to do some video chats. But yeah, I hope you guys are staying well. Things are fine here. We'd like to see the sun come back, but all in all, things are going well. And I just want to hammer home the fact that online learning is a different platform. And I think even with the situation right now, we might not even know if we'll be back to school in September. So online learning is something that's going to be a thing for a while. By being able to do what you're doing and your responses and getting the content this way, you're teaching yourself how to learn a different way, which is very important as well. So I appreciate all your hard work. And once again, I'm just an email away. So take care, enjoy, and I'll touch base with you guys later on this week.